Have you struggled throughout your history to find and maintain the relationship that you really want? Do you flip out when your partner wants to go out on a guys or girls night? Do you go into panic or shut down when you're in conflict together as a couple? Today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the number one reason why all this occurs and what you can do to change it. Hi, my name is John Hawkins Jr. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and trauma specialist and co-founder of Hawkins Counseling Center here in South Florida. The biggest reason is what we define in therapy as attachment trauma. So most people come into my office and they would deny that they've been through any type of trauma. And you can come from very good families with great parents and extended families and still have variations in different forms of attachment trauma. Historically, attachment trauma has been defined as disruptions in bonding between an infant or a child and their primary caregiver. So again, degrees of severity. So let's say somebody went through some very significant disruptions like severe neglect, abuse, abandonment, separation, all these kind of things that can, leave some very deep wounds. But for many people from the good families I'm talking about, there can be chronic misattunements, lack of certain emotional skills in terms of regulation from the caregivers, even though they're good people and they're physically present and providing. So a lot of these things will then form and get etched into our brain and nervous system, into what's called implicit memory, which is something I talk about every video, every session with every single client I've ever worked with. It's the thing that's running the whole show in all of our lives, something we were never told about, educated about. I've got videos that speak on that. I'm gonna produce even more videos to keep speaking about it. You can Google that. You can look up on Amazon books that refer to trauma and memory and really start to educate yourself about that. So going back to that, I would define trauma again by Diana Fosha, who developed accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. Her definition of trauma for me is the most comprehensive. It's unwanted and unwilled, overwhelming emotions in the face of aloneness or helplessness. So I would integrate that into the definition for attachment trauma. Anytime we have those energetic states or what we call emotional states that we can't regulate, that's going to cause some kind of dissociative split. I would say we disassociate what we can't regulate. And then that's how things start to get stored up in our implicit memory. And when, again, there could be death by 1,000 cuts where there's these small micro misattunements, but we have to start either disassociating that energy or adapting to not getting the co-regulation we need. As human beings, we have this capacity, this latent potential to regulate our emotional energy and use it to create the life we want by expressing it into what's called adaptive action. If we can't regulate that, then we have to develop defenses against it. The way we get that ability is through what we call co-regulation, and this is where the attachment comes into. So I come to my caregiver, whether that's a parent, grandparent, whoever's there for me raising me. I could be excited, sad, scared, ashamed, whatever that is, and then I connect with them, reach for them. They attune to me energetically and help me learn how to regulate that state, and then that state gets internalized and forms the foundation of not only my ability to regulate my emotions, but also my sense of self and psychological identity. So if we have to start blocking those things, we start splitting off aspects of self. So let's say in the case of what I was saying, maybe if your partner wants to go out on a guys or girls night and it's an appropriate thing, but yet you're in this panic the whole time, or maybe expresses itself as anger and rage or passive aggressiveness towards them. Maybe there was times in your history where there was a separation between you and your caregiver that I never got regulated. So I had to split that off. And so now when they start to go away rationally, maybe I'm even supportive of it, but I get this panicky feeling in my body, this attachment trauma. I had a client one time who she had her daughter was a really good kid, freshman in college, never been in any trouble, super responsible. She goes, every time she goes out on the weekend, whether she's back home 12, 1 o'clock, she's not out partying, she's a good kid, I just sit there with all this panic inside of me. And so her and I started exploring that, and these memories came up when she was about 3 years old. Her mom was a chronic alcoholic and would just drop her off at people's houses, and she had no idea if mom's coming back, what kind of condition she's gonna be in. So she would sit there waiting for mom as a 3 or 4 year old child with these people she barely knew, wondering if she's gonna come back. So in that case, that's one of the causes. If we look at parental factors, things like substance abuse, mental health issues, maybe a mom has severe postpartum depression or some other major depression early into the child's toddlerhood. So then she's emotionally shut down. So then the infant or the child can't get the co-regulation they need, not because mom's a bad mom, but she's just inaccessible, struggling with her own mental health issues. There can also be environmental factors like poverty, instability. Maybe somebody's in a military family, or for whatever reason, due to financial crisis, they have to relocate, move around a lot. So the parents are, again, also very stressed and anxious and trying to deal with all this crisis. There could be war trauma. Maybe your parents or yourself grew up in an environment where there's a lot of violence, like in a domestic violence situation, where even an infant knows there's something wrong with the attachment figures because their survival is dependent on it. So then if the parents are in a lot of conflict or fighting, is very anxiety inducing to the child. So let's say the way that may express itself in adulthood is you get into minor conflict with your partner and you either go into a rage because all that adrenaline from the fear of the toddler you comes up, or you get super anxious and panicky and just want it to stop. Maybe you just give in or are conflict avoidant, to just do everything you can to make sure my partner's happy all the time. So these attachment traumas, again, different degrees of severity, so I'm not putting everything in the same camp. Other things with relationship, there could be, again, just lack of attunement and relational and emotional skills handed down in the family history. So, let's say there's certain emotions that we just don't do as a family, or we don't know how to do as a family. They could get dismissed, they could get spiritualized. A good example is one client I work with where she would reach for her mom, and they were a family of faith, but her mom would just spiritualize everything as an emotional defense. So spirituality is a good thing, but it can also be used defensively. So every time she would come to reach for her mom and just connect with her, just to get, validated, affirmed, the mom would give her a Bible verse, and she would just, one day lost it. It was like, can't you just be a freaking mom for once? Don't tell me something. Don't try to cheer me up, take it away. Like, just be a mom for me, please, just one time. So then those things continue to show up throughout our relationships in all kinds of different ways. Here's some different ways that you might identify with. Maybe you weren't totally conscious of this before. I wanted to look at different effects of how attachment trauma manifests. So one of the biggest ways is going to be difficulty regulating my emotions, because I didn't get that co-regulation I need. I never built the foundation within myself neurologically to regulate these energetic states, and then, like I said, use them effectively. So then you could end up getting what we call hyper aroused, where when you start to feel emotions, I get too activated, or I get hypo, which is low activity, and I just don't feel that much. There's a simple 3-step thing we talk about in therapy. Some people can deal but not feel. So these are the hypo aroused people. So they often, even in my experience, will see them, especially in a relationship context, see themselves as superior to their partner. Like, why do you get so upset by that? Or why do you make such a big deal about that? Because they don't feel that much. I can deal, I can take care of stuff, but I just don't really feel. Other people can feel, but not deal. These are the hyper aroused people. So then they get very flooded and activated. So the goal is we want to eventually get to a place where we can deal and feel. We can feel our emotions adequately and then utilize them. The other thing that happens with attachment traumas, especially the more significant traumas, where there was, significant neglect, different forms of abuse, is it's really hard to trust in relationships, because I never developed like a basic internal sense of trust in the environment around me as an infant, as a young child. When your needs are responded to, just even subconsciously, you internalize a belief that I matter, I'm worthy of being responded to, and I can trust that I will. So when that wasn't there, and that'll look in adult relationships like things will be going fine, and all of a sudden I have all this like fear and distrust of my partner. Are they going to abandon me? Are they going to turn on me? Are they going to get violent with me? And I always say they could be Buddha floating through the air, or Jesus walking on water, and I'm still going to be terrified of them. So it's not necessarily like the partner itself, but my attachment history. The other thing that happens to people is when you go through those kind of disruptions, or especially in the neglect and abuse stuff, you internalize a lot of feelings of shame and worthlessness. It doesn't mean you're whole being in its totality feels worthless, but there's going to be a lot of parts that hold shame and worthlessness. And then what we really understood in the last few decades with neuroscience and what we call neurobiology is that the foundation of a lot of the what we'd historically define as mental health disorders actually stem from attachment traumas and disruptions in attachment. So if we go back to like the hyper and hypo aroused individuals. So if my system had to over-regulate, or what we say becomes parasympathetically dominated, your parasympathetic nervous system brings energy down because there was no attachment coming, there was all this stuff going around me. You see this, some kids adapt like this in chronically violent neighborhoods or homes. They can walk by and just see somebody dead on the street and it doesn't even faze them, they're just eating ice cream. Or maybe I get, I have to track my caregivers. Is mom or dad gonna be drunk or high? Are they gonna go from like loving to violent? Or are they gonna get in a domestic violence incident? So you become very like hyper vigilant. So then these will get diagnosed as disorders like generalized anxiety or major depressive disorder, but a lot of times what they are is adaptions from the failure of attachment or attachment trauma in some cases. The other way that trauma will show up behaviorally, going back to like the trust, the distrust, is it's hard to maintain and form healthy bonds and connections with others because we never did. We never got the experience of having secure attachment, feeling safe. What happens too when you have an abusive parent in whatever form, whether it's verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, is we're instinctually wired as mammals. We have a neurological attachment system to reach for attachment. But when that attachment is the threat, then it splits us. In child development, they call it fright without solution for the child. So then your attachment system and your defense system start to become neurologically wired together. So I could have an amazing partner, but as I get closer and closer to them, I either get anxious or I go numb, or I engage in some destructive behavior like just an affair or a breakup just to get out of the anxiety because I can't take the fear of being abandoned or my partner turning on me or whatever that may be. There's higher incidence of things like compulsive behaviors, substance use, to regulate all those things. I've had clients where the only way they can maintain healthy attachments and keep their anxiety low is to stay using substances. So maybe they take prescription pills or smoke a lot of cannabis or opiate medications, and that's the way they're able to maintain connection, even though there's a cost to that or it diminishes connection in other ways. Their anxiety and their fear of those attachment traumas is too big that they can't maintain the connection without using those kind of things. The other thing that you'll hear, I'm not big on diagnosis. I'll explain to people when they have forms of post-traumatic stress, but a historical diagnosis is something like borderline personality disorder. These are different adaptions and split off implicit parts of ourselves. And so for most people I've worked with, either the diagnosis is very shaming and demeaning, or I've had other, particularly women in treatment centers, wear it like a badge of honor. So in most cases, what the person has is complex PTSD, different forms of attachment trauma, or they've had to split off those different states or parts where they're just so hyper aroused and flooded. And so then when, let's say, a partner pulls back or says no or does something, even if it's appropriate, it activates those implicit memories and floods them so severely that then they engage in these, it could be like cutting or burning or severe substance use or violence or rage. They just don't know how to manage all that energy. And so then getting some skills temporarily to help start to contain some of that is useful. It's not going to resolve the underlying problem, which then really comes down to working experientially. So, the thing I want you to walk away from watching this video is that all this stuff is resolvable. It takes work, it's hard, but it's well worth it. Is that you can clear these old memories out of your nervous system, release that energy from the body, get co-regulation through healthy people. Let's say usually it starts with somebody like myself or a therapist, who can do attachment focused work. So you need to find, a helper. They're not going to go away on themselves, no matter how many books you read. I've had clients that will do everything to avoid the deep relational work because I know it can be scary for them or feel like it's going to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be that way. We break it into really small pieces, but they'll educate themselves to the hilt. They've come in, they've read probably as many books as I have, and they're doing everything to avoid connection, thinking that they can just cognitively, rationally figure this out and put an end to it. And so the education part is great. It's definitely one of the things I advocate, but you need to find somebody who does attachment-focused experiential work. My big 5 are accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, what I mentioned with dynaphobia, internal family systems, EMDR, brain spotting, and somatic experiencing. There's other experiential therapies that are great. There's reasons those are my big 5. ADP and IFS are my top 2. But find somebody who does experiential work. Traditional talk therapy is not going to reset any of this stuff. You've got to create neuroplasticity to really start to shift these patterns and these old adaptations, because their attachment is embedded in the more primitive parts of the brain, so it can't be overridden logically, rationally. And then the final thing is you've got to identify and find people who have the potential and the qualities of somebody who's capable of developing secure attachment with. I've ran groups on this and taught people for years, and I'll write down things like basic trust, predictability, reliability, safety, empathy, the ability to regulate their emotions. Say, how many people like this do you have in your life? And certain groups, it's crickets. It's no one. So if you keep seeking out people, which I get, some attachment's better than no attachment, but they don't have the qualities. They're inconsistent, they're unreliable, they're emotionally up and down. Like, you're not going to be able to repair your attachment traumas and develop co-regulation capacities and secure attachment with somebody who doesn't have the capability. So you really need to be discriminating, not judgmental, but discriminating about who you start to develop relationships, whether it's a friendship, an acquaintance, a romantic partner, a therapist. So my clients know that I am very real and down to earth. I love to have fun and mess around with my clients, but if I'm not real, therapy's not going to work. But they know they don't have to walk in every time they come to a session every week and say, "What John am I getting today?" Because otherwise, I'm just going to replicate their attachment trauma. So you need to, whether it's a clinician or a friend or anybody, you need to have people who've got those qualities and abilities to help me then start to internalize them and regulate that stuff. If you want to learn more about attachment trauma, which is, again, the underlying #1 primary thing that causes challenges in relationships, they can't just be rationally overridden. Reach out to me or my wife anytime at hawkinscounselingcenter.com, and we will gladly give you more resources if you'd like to sit down with either of us, if you'd like me to help find referrals in your area, if you want to do somebody face-to-face, anything, we're here to help people. So again, you can reach us at hawkinscounselingcenter.com. I hope this has been helpful, informative, and started to put you on a path of actually healing from my attachment traumas, and then being able to finally find the relationship you deserve and that you're worthy of.